as jihadism spreads south from the Sahel, Côte d'Ivoire, which exports 40% of the world's cocoa, is racing to save itself before contagion reaches Abidjan. March 29, 2021. Pre-dawn on Côte d'Ivoire's northeastern border with Burkina Faso. 2 soldiers and a gendarme are killed in a coordinated double attack on Ivorian security forces. Nobody claims it, but the methodical execution carries the fingerprints of Al-Qaeda's Saharan affiliate. 3 months later, jihadists cross from Burkina Faso again and storm a military base. 14 people dead. These aren't isolated incidents. Armed groups that spent 6 years embedded in Mali and Burkina Faso are now pushing south into the country that pumps 40% of the world's cocoa, the country your chocolate bar runs through. The question that should worry anyone with a global supply chain: how far does this spread and how fast? For a decade, West Africa's coastal anchor felt insulated from Sahel chaos. That insulation is gone. The northern frontier is a live theater, and analysts warn the violence we see today is the front edge of something much bigger building behind it. We're going to walk you through how the Sahel's collapse reached Abidjan's doorstep, and what happens to global markets if it doesn't stop here. Because the cocoa in your kitchen, the cashews in airline snack packs, the gold in your phone, every one of them runs through a country now staring down a fight it didn't start. Here's what's on the table. Watch where Côte d'Ivoire sits in the global cocoa supply. 40% of every bean moving through one country. Add the rest of West Africa, and 70% of the world's cocoa flows out of a region now sliding toward instability. If the threat reaches the plantations, your chocolate, every processed snack, every confectionery brand on earth feels it. One country, one supply line, one bad year away from a global price shock. The violence didn't appear from nowhere. Look at what broke north. Mali fell to coups in 2020 and again in 2021. Burkina Faso, twice in 2022. Niger, 2023. Each junta promised security and delivered the opposite. State control collapsed across roughly half their territories, and armed groups walked straight into the vacuum. The chain reaction is simple. The consequences for the country sitting downstream are not. And the map shows exactly where the bleeding starts. Watch the arrows from Mali and Burkina Faso converge on northeastern Côte d'Ivoire, the Bounkani region. 6 years of incubation, finally crossing the border. AQIM-linked fighters are now operating inside Ivorian territory. The first major hit landed in June 2021. The question is whether the violence stays at the frontier or pushes south into the cocoa belt itself. Côte d'Ivoire isn't facing this alone, until you look at who used to stand between Abidjan and the Sahel. For 9 years, France ran Operation Barkhane, thousands of troops hunting jihadists across Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. In August 2022, that mission ended. Mali kicked France out. Then Burkina Faso, February 2023. Niger, by December that year. Senegal and Chad followed in late 2024. And in January 2025, President Alassane Ouattara confirmed the last French troops were leaving Côte d'Ivoire too. France now has soldiers in exactly 2 African countries, Djibouti and Gabon. That is the end of an era. Stepping into the vacuum, Russia. Wagner Group, rebranded Africa Corps under Moscow's defense ministry, took over former French bases in Gao, Monaco, and Timbuktu. Around 5,000 Russian operatives are now spread across the continent, and they are nowhere near what they replaced. France and the EU were spending roughly $1.5 billion a year on Mali operations alone. The UN peacekeeping mission added another billion on top. Wagner brings a fraction of that, and Mali has no budget to top it up. The data we reviewed is direct, Insecurity is set to grow because the muscle that contained it is gone. The Sahel just lost its referee, and the country south of the collapse is the one holding the bill. With the West gone and the threat advancing, the response landed on one desk: Ouattara's. January 22, 2022. Prime Minister Patrick Achi steps to a podium in Abidjan with a number: 32 billion CFA francs, 55 million US dollars. Over 3 years, all of it pointed at the north: schools, jobs, roads, water. The bet is straightforward. Young men with no work and no future are exactly who jihadist recruiters look for. Cut the desperation, cut the recruits. Alongside the money, Ouattara is hardening the border itself. More troops in the Bankani region, deeper coordination with neighbors, intelligence sharing across the regional bloc. There's also an unverified pledge that 1% of GDP, somewhere near $600 million, would go to security. The official budget has never quite confirmed it. What Ouattara is doing is unusual. Most of the Sahel responded to jihadism with pure militarization. The juntas in Mali and Burkina cracked down hard and watched the violence get worse. Côte d'Ivoire is trying the opposite playbook: development first, military second, regional cooperation third. The research points to a measured optimism. On current trends, this combination could contain the threat. If the money actually reaches the north, if the security forces hold the border, and if the elections coming next don't blow the whole plan up. Picture what's at stake if that plan fails, and zoom into one harbor: Abidjan, West Africa's biggest port. 25 million tons of cargo move through it every year. 75,000 jobs hang on it. A new container terminal is coming online, pushing capacity to 1.5 million units. And it doesn't only serve Côte d'Ivoire, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, 3 landlocked countries with no other realistic export route, funnel almost everything through Abidjan. Now stack the commodities. Cocoa runs 40% of the world's supply and 30% of Ivorian export revenue. Cashew nuts. The country has been the world's biggest exporter since 2015, 20% of global production, around 1 million tons a year. Then gold. 48 tons in 2022, climbing to 55 by 2024, $3.1 billion in export earnings last year. If insecurity touches the supply chains feeding that port, the plantations in the north, the trucking routes down from the Sahel, global prices for chocolate, processed snacks, and the cashews in airline snack packs all move. All of them. This is the part most viewers never see. A jihadist attack on a border post in Bonkani is not a faraway African story. It is a signal that travels through commodity desks in London, Singapore, and Chicago within hours. The research warns, a single bad year here ripples through global markets for the next 2. And right when the country needs unity, the political calendar walked into the worst possible moment. Rewind to October 2020. Alassane Ouattara wins a 3rd presidential term, even though the constitution caps a president at 2. His argument, a new constitution adopted in 2016, reset the clock. The opposition didn't buy it. Most major parties boycotted the vote, called it illegitimate, and the country slid into low-level unrest for weeks. The reconciliation that followed has been, in the words of the research, piecemeal. Now, the next electoral cycle is rolling toward Côte d'Ivoire, with the jihadist threat still hot in the north. The math is brutal. A contested election, plus an active insurgency, is the exact recipe that has destabilized every neighbor above this border. When state legitimacy frays, jihadist groups expand. They don't beat armies, they exploit divisions. Ouattara argued the 2016 constitution had reset the clock. If a repeat performance triggers a second wave of unrest, the security forces stretched along the Burkina Faso border have to choose, hold a line, or pull back to protect the capital. Either choice opens a door. The data we reviewed projects renewed political tension along the path of recent elections. If it holds, Côte d'Ivoire could end up fighting two fires at once. The bigger risk the numbers expose, not the militants, but the politics behind the line that's supposed to hold them. That brings us to three roads diverging from here. And Côte d'Ivoire hasn't picked one yet. Containment. The development money lands, the border holds, regional cooperation tightens, and the jihadist threat stays bottled up in Bangkani. The port keeps moving. The cocoa keeps flowing. The election passes without ignition. Contagion. Violence pushes past the frontier into Korhogo, into the cocoa belt itself. Plantations go quiet. Trucking routes from Mali shut down. Insurance premiums spike. Commodity desks start hedging Ivorian risk for the first time in decades. Collapse. A contested election in the south, an active insurgency in the north, a Russian replacement force too thin to matter. And Abidjan's port, the lifeline for three landlocked neighbors, becomes a target itself. The research is direct. The trend the numbers expose is that the Sahel spillover gets worse before it gets better. The question is whether Côte d'Ivoire can be the firewall, or becomes the next domino. Step back. The story we just walked is a chain. A French withdrawal in Mali. Coups across three capitals. A power vacuum filled by mercenaries who couldn't fill it. Jihadists who walked south. And one country trying to spend its way out of a fight the region already lost. Watch the cocoa price over the next 12 months. It will tell you which scenario is winning. This crisis could reshape West Africa's economy. Like this, if you track global security threats, share with anyone watching the Sahel, and subscribe for stories the news misses. See you tomorrow.